What's up, guys? Hello to Footballtalk here, wrapping up week 3 of a draft and roster breakdown series for all 8 divisions in the NFL, and we've got a fun one at hand as we're going over to the AFC South, which includes the Texans, Colts, Jaguars, and Titans, who combined to select 3 of the top 4 quarterbacks in this draft. As always, we'll give each franchise its time to shine, try to describe every player selected with a few bullet points, and then point out how they fit with what the roster looks like in terms of veterans, talk about the draft class as a whole, and what it means for those sides, and then at the end of the video we'll do a quick ranking of those 4 classes in terms of how those teams were able to take advantage of the capital that was available to them. This division made a lot of picks, with a couple of teams selecting at least 12 players, so I'll try to run through these a little bit quicker than maybe in other episodes, but I do have notes on all but like 4 names, and this is a key video of course because of the quarterback dynamics, and the one team that already had their guy being among the favorites to compete for the AFC in 2023. Timestamps for each of them are down below in the video description, along with the link to my page helloswithfootballtalk.com for all my other draft related content if you really want to dive into these player profiles, potential impact on drafted free agents, and much more, as well as my social media handles if you're interested in my opinions on other football stuff and just some extra content. With all that out of the way, let's kick things off with the Houston Texans, the team that delivered the first big shock of the draft when they traded up in order to make picks 2 and 3. With those, they selected CJ Stroud, the quarterback out of Ohio State, and Will Anderson Jr., the edge defender of Alabama. Then in the second round, they come back 62nd overall, Juice Scruggs, interior offensive lineman, Penn State. Third round, 69th overall, Tank Dell, wide receiver, Houston. Fourth round, 109th overall, Dylan Horton, edge defender, TCU. Fifth round, 167th overall, Henry To'oTo'o, linebacker, Alabama. Then 2 6th rounders, 201st and 205th overall, Jared Patterson, the interior O-lineman at Notre Dame, and Xavier Hutchinson, wide receiver, Iowa State. And then in the 7th round, 248th overall, Brandon Hill, the safety out of Pittsburgh. So after all the speculation around CJ Stroud supposedly falling, people killing him for bombing the S2 test, which barely anybody even knew about before this year, he ends up going 2nd overall, right behind Bryce Young, and while I still believe the Alabama quarterback was at the top of Houston's board, and the ones of most teams, at least in terms of quarterbacks, I think for a franchise that needed to hit on guys, there's a lot to like about Stroud in terms of a pro-ready passer who can stand tall and rip throws from the pocket. This guy's what the NFL has been looking for generally. Such a natural thrower, extremely consistent with his motion, totally comfortable delivering outside the numbers, and can lay the ball in between windows. Beautiful goal balls, but also power throws in the intermediate range, and excels at what I'd call talking to the receiver with the throw, in terms of where he leads or stops him in the field. His eyes remain down the field, and he's quick to navigate around pressure points and refine his platform to fire the ball from. The issue is that he's a little too content with just standing in the pocket, very little in terms of creating secondary plays, making something happen if the defense wins, and he certainly benefited from being in an offense where he had the luxury of tremendous protection and thrown to a variety of first-round receivers, where he wasn't asked to execute many multi-level reads and got to throw into a ton of space. I do believe the Texans have surrounded a young quarterback with enough pieces now to find success early on, and I'm interested in his marriage with new offensive coordinator Bobby Slowick, coming over from San Francisco, because they ran a lot of West Coast based patterns at Ohio State, and I think they create plenty of opportunities to hit the primary target with run off the catch setups, although those won't go to a Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith-Njigba, or Marvin Harrison Jr. And then of course they did go to the University of Alabama at pick number 3, in exchange for picks 12, 33, the 1st and 3rd rounder next year, whilst getting back a pick at top day 3, which they were able to move for 3rd rounder next year themselves in exchange with the Eagles, all in order to pick up the guy they supposedly had a generational grade on in Will Anderson Jr., who in 2021 had historically ridiculous production and was still way up there this past season, but some people banging for those numbers slightly going down when he received as much attention as he did and lining up on the inside shade of the tackle a lot more often. Now, I don't see him as like a perennial all-pro 15+ sack star, because he's not an elite athlete and his pass rush arsenal still lacks some diversification, but in terms of somebody who fires his hands into the frame of blockers, plays with great leverage, and a surprisingly strong lower body for only being 245 pounds, gladly throws his body into traffic to create trash in the backfield, has Cadillac quicks, and excels at converting speed to power, keeping the hands working with advanced technique. It also doesn't mind doing the dirty work and crashing into a shoulder of a guard in order to set up a secondary looper. This guy is a great all-around football player who also showed highly impressive transitions during the coverage drills at the Combine. I pretty much said everything already here, but this will be the cornerstone piece on defense under DeMeco Ryans, another former Crimson Tide alum, and set the tone for that unit as a relentless worker, and now transitioning to that wide defensive end role that he probably plays for DeMeco. He should have a lot of success there. I actually really like Juice Scruggs and looked at him as one of my favorite late round targets at center, but he actually went at the end of the second here, and this seems like a definite overpay on top of it, giving up a 6th and 7th rounder in order to move up 3 spots for a player that based on the board, and who was picking in between those spots would have most likely not come off. Great snap to step quickness, packs a strong punch to set the tone of the initial movements in the run game, and patiently works up to the second level, provides active lateral movement to slide in front of, and has a dense frame to anchor against more power interior rushers, shows excellent communication skills against different blitz packages, manages that space between the guards very well to sort of sync and make sure those A-gaps stay clean once he sees color flash his way. The reason I looked at him as more of an early day 3 guy at least, is that he's not a plus athlete for the position, I'd say, not the lightest on his feet in order to secure targets in extended space, and in pass pro he heavily relies on the 200 punches, which will be more regularly taken advantage of by crafty NFL rushers. So I think he can be a star in this league for multiple years, and should be an immediate upgrade over Scott Quessenberry and more of an athletic project than Jim Morrissey. I just don't agree with the value, especially giving up extra assets to move up for him, although the idea of linking a young quarterback and center at the hip does make sense. I do love Tank Dell early in the third though, around where I valued him, and I certainly get the concerns here with a player that is just 5'8", 165 pounds. He's very untested against press coverage, and needs to become more efficient at releasing against off defenders, trying to stay square against him, while he will get overwhelmed by bigger slot defenders in the run game, if that's where he primarily lines up, as those run right through his chest at times. With that being said, he has easy gas off the line, and eats up the cushion by safeties in a hurry in order to fly by them and strike fear into the hearts of defenses with his speeds. Yet he also uses that ability to put defense on the heels, and combined with being able to stop on a dime, he's able to route guys up one-on-one, which was on display all Senior Bowl week long. He has a couple of really impressive catches on tape, where he has to elevate for the ball, and the defenders swipe him through the catch point, yet he still secures the grab. You can put the ball in his hands in space, and he will string together consecutive moves to navigate around bodies, as somebody who converted 71 of his 109 catches into first downs last season. As we learned later, Dell had already built a relationship with his new quarterback at the Combine, and told Stroud he should ask the Texans to get him, so that's an awesome story that they get to reunite in Houston now, with Dell having a short drive over from campus, and they'll probably create some magic together right away. With how many guys Houston already has in the slots, I think if they put him off the ball, with Nico Collins at X, he can play the Z and help them clear out space pushing vertically. Day 3 they start off with Dylan Horton, somebody who played a lot of 4 iron 5 technique, despite being 250 pounds at best. His body looks more stout, and he shows the anchor skills of somebody playing primarily inside, along with the strong upper body and quick hands to slip blocks in the run game. He displays some pretty impressive ability to link his arms and legs together, especially when tackles overset on him, rushing from true edge alignments, and him winning across the face with a high swim, while being able to yank us to the side when he finds himself in a bit of a stalemate, in order to open up a path towards the quarterback for himself. He could still get better at IDing run schemes early, and countering those first steps accordingly, while I don't see the burst of the ball to consistently threaten the corner, and at this point is too much of a reactionary pass rusher. The Texans now have a good variety of young and veteran edge defenders, where Horton is probably 5th in line, and might not see the field a ton, but from what DeMeco did in San Francisco, and defensive coordinator Matt Berg is familiar with from his stops so far, you see them rotate guys through a lot, and I think Horton can give them some quality snaps, especially on the inside and passing situations. They go back to Alabama with Henry To'oTo'o in the 5th round, who I saw as somebody who should have gone a couple of rounds earlier. This isn't a high-level athlete necessarily, sometimes loses discipline on the front side, guesses on cutbacks, reading things more like a running back, has to get better at defeating the back in protection, and as a tackler, where he doesn't shoot his hips and drives his legs in order to bring people to the ground. But he was a key piece for the Crimson Tide defense at Mike, being able to flow with square shoulders, facing zone runs, light on his feet and has long arms to work around blockers climbing up to him, active communicator in zone coverage, who does a great job of taking away routes over the middle, along with the smooth hips to adjust his angles without problem, and he recognizes when there's a lane open up for him as a spy, or the back being locked in protection when he's a man on him. Now they reunite him with Christian Harris, who they picked from Bama in the 3rd round last year, as they complement each other very well, where To'oTo'o can clean up for Harris, trying to make plays with natural athletic playmaking skills. If that turns out to be Houston's starting duo eventually, although Denzel Perryman should certainly be ahead of him on the depth chart this year at least. Jared Patterson is somebody with high quality tape at guard and center as a 4-year starter for the Irish. Just a very crafty player in the run game in terms of his angles, connecting with the aiming points and taking care of his assignments, while being familiar with a variety of pulling duties and showcasing outstanding effort on screen plays. Quick to land his hands initially and lifting up through contact with pass rushers, as well as refit and right guys off track in a hurry. Plus, when he's unoccupied, he really keeps his head on a swivel. He's a slightly below average for NFL standards, with short arms and therefore getting top heavy a lot of times, which we saw him get punished for during Senior Bowl practices. But I think as somebody who can turn himself into a primary backup for all 3 interior spots, this is excellent value, and his skill set is actually quite similar to Scruggs at pick 62, who had slightly below Patterson. Xavier Hutchinson, all the way at pick 205, is one of my favorite steals of this entire draft. He's not somebody who will burn defenses over the top, run away, or make tackles miss a whole lot after the catch, but in terms of a big-bodied receiver with inside-out versatility, consistently is able to create angles for the ball with the way he varies his releases and creates that initial separation from the DB and man, finds soft spots against zone, the way he attacks the ball in traffic, but can also pluck it off the top shelf and turn 50-50 situations in his favor, plus then he gets vertical in a hurry in order to create positive plays. I think this is an NFL-ready receiver who I had among the top 10 at the position, and he ends up going as wide receiver 24, just phenomenal value. I would not be shocked if he starts by year 2, because he just knows how to play. And finally, Brandon Hill, the Pitt safety, betting on a guy with great athletic traits, led his position with a 4.43 in the 40 at the combine, went from splitting snaps pretty evenly in terms of pre-snap alignments to primarily being in the box or slot, has that explosiveness to play flat-footed and drive on routes and off-man, all he hips to flip around if he's turned the wrong way initially, with a closing burst to make up ground in a hurry, and a long speed to carry guys down the field. Also has a nice bounce to his step, and provides excellent range in the run game, but he is only 5'11", just over 190 pounds, with a slender frame, so not a great matchup against tight ends, and panics a little bit when playing with his back towards the quarterback, running with receivers down the field. Yet his play recognition working from depth also leaves things to be desired. So a guy who'll need to prove his value on special teams if he wants to make that roster, behind a couple of safeties that they've invested high draft capital and or money into. All in all, I think the Texans were able to find some great value on day 3, and that's what bumps them up a little bit here, but the trade up for Scruggs at the end of the second round was really steep, and Will Anderson Jr. would need to be a legit Hall of Fame level defensive player in order to pay off his trade up for a non-quarterback in the top 3, according to a lot of the studies conducted by analytics services, and just looking at the historical data on the surface. So I like the conviction that they showed, and I think with the smokescreen around Will Levis, going Stroud at number 2 is definitely the better bet, but the whole idea of them actually trading for the quarterback rather than Anderson, when he literally picked him where they did, and the fact they would have otherwise trotted out Davis Mills yet again this year is just absurd. So yeah, love the value late, but a lot of draft capital invested over the first 2 days. I just know there should be a lot more guys out there that excite fans, and they're making the bet here that they're ready to turn this franchise around. Which has us moving on to team number 2 and the Indianapolis Colts. This was the RES extravaganza, as the Colts draftee with the lowest score was at 8 for 8, and only 2 of the 12 guys that they selected didn't at least crack a 9 in terms of relative athletic score, and that includes the first selection in quarterback Anthony Richardson, who might just be the most athletic quarterback we've ever seen come through the combine. So they pick him 4th overall, then they come back in the second round, 44th overall, Julius Brents, cornerback Kansas State, 3rd round, 79th overall, Josh Downs, wide receiver North Carolina, 2 4th rounders, 106th and 110th overall, Blake Freeland, offensive tackle BYU, and Adetomiwa Adebari, interior defensive lineman Northwestern. Then they had 4 5th rounders, Darius Rush, cornerback South Carolina, Daniel Scott, safety Cal, Bill Mallory, tight end Miami, and Evan Hull, running back Northwestern. Then in the 6th rounds, 211th overall, Titus Leo, edge defender Wagner, and then 2 7th rounders, Jalen Jones, cornerback Texas A&M, and Jake Witt, offensive tackle Northern Michigan. So as for Richardson, obviously an absolute freak of freaks, exceeding the likes of Cam Newton in terms of a 6'4", 245-pound guy who ran a 4.43 and tested in the 99th percentile in terms of the jumps, and that explosiveness shows up in terms of being able to rip off 81-yard touchdown runs against LSU and being able to punish defenses overall for leaving the lane open in front of him. But this guy's arm is even more deadly, where he can drive balls outside the numbers and push post routes 60 plus yards down the field. With that being said, he does a lot more of the little things of playing the position really well, in terms of navigating the pocket with smaller or more extensive movements, widening second level defenders with his eyes and stuff like that. Plus he was asked to make a lot of highly difficult throws down the field, where his receivers regularly let him down when the ball was put where he could make a play on it, which is why his completion percentage was as low as it was. Now, I won't excuse him for everything. There were plenty of misses underneath, because he would just try to arm it out there, and he gets pretty lazy with his footwork when he kind of predetermines where he wants to go with the football, against off coverage for example. However, while he kind of just threw it up for grabs a couple of times in 2021 and early on this season, when he should just live for another down, even the decision making was a lot better over the second half of the year. Richardson was my QB2 in this draft, because he's further along mentally than he gets credit for, and it's more about the lack of experience rather than rawness, and he's the one guy from this class with the talent to want to be up there with the elite at the position. After the Colts have just been rotating through veteran quarterbacks on the decline, they get a guy that just turned 21 years old with the potential to become a real needle mover in this league. Second round, they go with an arguably equally freaky cornerback in Julius Brents, 6'3", 200 pounds, with 34-inch arms, elite explosive testing, and above the 80th percentile mark in the agility drills. Has light feet for such a tall corner to mirror off the line, yet he can reroute guys with those long arms and frustrate them by denying easy access, playing in phase but still having the ability to turn and find the football, along with attacking it at its highest point. And he's bringing enough in more of a quarters-based scheme to drive in routes in front of him from distance. Actively condenses the edge and doesn't mind sticking his face in the fan run defense, with some slipperiness to elude blocks and the large tackling radius. His problem is that because he lacks some bulk, physical widers can take advantage of when they proactively attack his chest and put him in recovery mode. He needs to marry his feet to his arms and not get them stuck at times when he throws his jams, and he can lose touch with crafty route runners. But this was my number 7 corner in this class, who I had right around this range, and I think he steps in as the number 1 for this group right away, where he's in press alignment on the X-receiver, whilst Isaiah Rodgers plays the off, feels like corner role, and Kenny Moore remains in the slot of course. Josh Downs in the third is also closer to where I valued him, because you're talking about a pure slot receiver at 5'9", 175 pounds, who lets his size become an issue when he does face physical coverage defenders and has to block those guys, while his start-stop heavy approach, running routes, or trying to make people miss in space won't quite fly the same way in the NFL. But in terms of somebody who can shake slot defenders out of their boots and option routes, slide towards open space against zone coverages, can change up his footwork on the fly like a pro already, has drastically cut on his drop rates, and attacks the ball in the air better than many 6'3" guys who watch, hauling in 13 of 18 passes in contested situations last season, there's a lot to like here. Not the type of receiver that Anthony Richardson has had success with in college necessarily, but now you have those jitterbug guys with Downs and Isaiah McKenzie in the slot, between those towers at tight end and on the outside with Michael Pittman and Alec Pierce. They kind of needed that element to the offense. Indy started day 2 with 2 more athletic outliers in a positive sense on either side of the line of scrimmage, as Blake Freeland, the BYU tackle, set a new record for offensive linemen with his 37-inch vertical and has tremendous movement skills, who excels at riding the wave in wide zone schemes, but can also be utilized in crack toss and screen plays, whilst having gotten the job done in protection, allowing just 1 sack and 11 other pressures across 41 collegiate starts. He just struggles to find leverage, being nearly at 6'8", which plays part in not being able to drive people off the ball in the run game, and he's a little light in his pants to make up for it, working against power rushers. Whilst Adetomiwa Adebari, I'm still shocked that I made it this far, because purely based on tape, while this guy may only be 6'2", about 280 pounds, that natural leverage combined with 34-inch arms allows him to control solo blockers in the run game. He can shoot his gap with the explosion of the ball, and that has a tremendous combination of flexibility and power in his lower half to corner his rushes. Yet then you take into account that he literally slightly bested last year's first overall pick Travon Walker in every single combine event, despite being 10 pounds heavier, and you just scratch your head. Even if you take into account that he needs to work on disengagement from blocks and securing tackles more regularly, as well as widening his pass rush arsenal, I thought he had a chance to go late in day 1 even. So both of these guys extremely athletic projects, where Freeland probably sits at least 1 year behind Bernard Raymond, who I believe can be a solid starter in this league himself, before maybe they compete for that gig next year in training camp, and Ade becomes a part of a deep group of ass-kicking defensive linemen. For the 5th round, Darius Rush is another 6'2", 200-pound corner with 4.36 speed, who really made an impression on people during Senior Bowl week, with his route anticipation, closing burst, and length to disrupt the catch points, whilst being tremendous at reading the eyes of the receiver down the field, turning his head and elevating for the ball, with the soft hands to come down with it. But his footwork and off-man is rather sloppy. I'd like to see him use his physicality better when initiating contact with blockers, and he leaves his feet too much as a tackler. Great competition for, and at least backup behind Brents with a similar profile. Daniel Scott is another guy in the secondary who doesn't have the same size or ability to battle physical receivers, but super smooth mover who tested in the 84th percentile or better among safeties at every single combine drill but the 20-yard shuttle. Generally is very disciplined with not getting off his landmarks, and shows plus peripheral vision as a zone defender, love the click and close ability, driving on stuff in quarters or off man looks, and shows urgency working upfield against the run. The two things with him: needs to gain a better understanding for when to match routes in zone and not just cover grass, and he needs to work on not leaving his feet behind as a tackler, which led to an 18.4% missed tackle rate for his career. I don't think he'll challenge the top 3 safeties on the roster, but provides depth there and at nickel behind Kenny Moore. Will Mallory wasn't my favourite tight end because he's a bit of a one-trick pony without the functional strength to be an asset blocking in line, telegraphs his route a little bit, and has a poor win rate in contested situations, but he did run a 4.54 in the 40, has really worked on his early drop issues, shows excellent body control and can attack down the field, but even more so leaking out into the flats and becoming a yards after catch specialist with the suddenness to make people miss. And the area he is a really good blocker at is actually securing DBs in space in the screen game, so very different style to the two giants that they have there already in Mo Ellie Cox and Jelani Woods. But if they do decide to carry 4 guys along with Colin Granson, he could see the field in certain packages. Pick 176 they got back from the Stephon Gilmore trade, and Evan Hall, who they got here, is an interesting running back because he has good size at 5'11", 210 pounds, urgently approaches the line of scrimmage, with underrated lateral agility, lots of incremental movement that allows him to ultimately get to daylight, and then he can not only make the safety miss one-on-one, but also does a great job of reducing the surface area for tacklers and becoming a bowling ball who can bounce off contact. Has to press the front side more diligently in zone schemes rather than taking the immediate cutback at times, lacks that extra gear to rip off explosives, and for a big back, the way he gets his feet stuck and drops his eyes in pass pro was a bit disappointing. They still see something in Zach Moss that I just don't anymore, behind Jonathan Taylor, and Deion Jackson has been an effective player for them as long as he's held onto the ball, but this guy could be useful and has a chance to ascend to RB2 status. Titus Leo is somebody who does a great job of staying low off the ball, providing shock in his hands and maximizing his 34-inch arms to set a hard edge in the run game, along with tremendous effort to discard blocks and chase after the ball. At his best, converting speed to power in the pass game, with a lot of force in his hands and maintaining extension. Plus, if tackles overset to the outside, he packs an effective 2-handed swipe to jump inside of them. I just like to see him keep his outside arm free in the run game, and has some stiffness in his hips to flatten towards the quarterback, along with drawing 11 flags over the last 2 years. Probably deep on the depth charts, but ready to hunt if he gets a chance. Jalen Jones is somebody who I just didn't get having legit NFL prospects, because while he's a long physical player who could have success in a cover 2 based system, which you don't really see that many anymore, watching him have the second best 10-yard split among corners, but then the second worst 40 altogether, kind of just confirmed what I considered somebody who doesn't have the long speed to survive outside in this league, maybe a transition candidate to safety or a matchup player against tight ends. While Jake Witt is a very intriguing name at 6'7", 300 pounds, only started playing football in 2020, and even saw that season cancelled due to COVID, then started out at tight end, but was asked to move to the offensive line during halftime of one of the games the following year, and just stuck there. Raw as it can be with only basically 1.5 years of starting, but somehow was able to get the job done, and then had a historically great pro day performance, so somebody worth stashing in the practice squad at least, and seeing what you have in him. The Colts absolutely stayed true to what general manager Chris Ballard believes in, bringing in athletes with great character, and coach them up. The amount of freaks he was able to find here, yet a lot of them also feature substantial qualities that you can see during game action, is astonishing. I think they might have started the draft with 3 quality starters, who depending on how quickly Anthony Richardson can acclimate himself to the pro game, could turn out to be franchise altering. Because I love his fit in the Shane Steichen offense, who can take a lot off his quarterback's plate mentally, as we saw with so many simplistic reads for Jalen Hurts in Philly last season. It accentuated his qualities as a runner to still make him very productive, and on day 3, they were just looking for specimen who can be backups early on, but betting on the trades and how a lot of these guys performed during the All-Star circuit could really make a difference down the road. And it has to be mentioned that Indy also signed Alabama interior offensive lineman Emil Achior as an undrafted free agent, which is wild to me still, since I had a third round grade on him and haven't heard anything concerning medically. I talked about him in my article on the most impactful UDFAs about 3 weeks ago, if you want to check that out, over on my page hellosofootballtalk.com. But now let's move on to a third team here in the Jacksonville Jaguars, who picked even one more player with 13 total. I'm a little mad at Jacksonville because they're putting me to shame here, not having watched 3 of the players they selected, the most of any team in the league, but let's rattle them off here quickly. First round, 27th overall, Anton Harrison, offensive tackle, Oklahoma. Second round, 61st overall, Brenton Strange, tight end, Penn State. Third round, 88th overall, Tank Bixby, running back, Auburn. 2 fourth rounders, 121st overall, Ventrell Miller, linebacker, Florida, and 130th overall, Tyler Lacey, edge/interior D-line, Oklahoma State. 2 fifth rounders, 136th overall, Yazir Abdullah, linebacker/edge of Louisville, and 160th overall, Antonio Johnson, safety, Texas A&M. And 3 sixth rounders, Parker Washington, wide receiver, Penn State, Christian Braswell, cornerback, Rutgers, and Eric Hallett, the safety out of Pittsburgh. And then 3 more guys in the 7th round, Cooper Hodges, interior offensive lineman, Appalachian State, Raymond Worsek, interior defensive lineman out of North Carolina, and Derek Parrish, edge defender, Houston. And general manager Trent Baalke made some savvy moves here, taking picks 160 and 240 from the Giants, in return for moving back 1 spot, and then picking up the 130th selection from the Bills to go back 2 more to 27th overall, yet they still get the consensus offensive tackle 5, after you were just informed that your starting left tackle Cam Robinson will be suspended for up to 6 games for the use of PEDs. Anton Harrison is a very talented player who showed lots of growth in Oklahoma's RPO and spread-heavy offense. He doesn't feature an overpowering build, but is a highly athletic mover with 34.5-inch arms. Where he's at his best in the run game, are combo blocks on big up defenders with his guards, or on calling on linebackers of wraparounds on GT Power, for example. There's good rhythm and a certain calmness in his kick slides, with the light feet to guide edge defenders around the loop. You see him be patient with reading his man, timing up his punches exceptionally well, and then taking charge once he lands his hands inside the guy's chest. The thing he really has to work on is the flexibility in his hips, as he struggles to reduce his height and find leverage in the run game unless he rolls his shoulders over, as well as sitting back with a flat chest and good sync as a pass protector. That, combined with carrying his hands low and coming in wide on many occasions, could be tested regularly by guys who understand how to convert speed to power effectively. Assuming Jacksonville sticks Walker Little at right tackle in order to allow the rookie to stay on the blind side and not lead to too much shuffling around, Harrison will be pushed straight in for Cam Robinson, which, even despite the negatives I just mentioned, he just found ways to get the job done, and I truly believe they'll just evaluate his play and the plans for the rest of his rookie campaign whenever Robinson returns from his suspension, which seems to be not determined yet. Second round, they go tight end with Brenton Strange here, a guy who wasn't really talked about until about a month before the draft, but somebody who you definitely find is a pretty complete package, presents a dense, powerful frame, and what I said in my scouting report on him, he's out for blood as a blocker, where he's capable of executing all kinds of assignments, generally operate from a wide base and provides great leg drive, and he was a weapon almost as a blocker in the screen game, with the way he could cover up DBs in space and provided room to operate for his fellow receivers. Comes off the ball with plus burst, yet then can really sit down in the chair and cleanly come out of his breaks, being fell into the quarterback, and really work in the middle of the field on hooks and stick routes, along with working towards openings and zone coverage, and with much improved hands. And then he becomes a rolling train once he turns up the field, averaging 7.3 yards after the catch this past season. Although his catch radius, and right now his ability to just win on routes one-on-one, leave things to be desired. Jacksonville used the franchise tag on Evan Ingram this offseason, who is much of a flexed out F-type, and had his most productive season in year 1 under Doug Peterson. Now they bring in Strange, who is much more comfortable playing in line, and allows them to improve the versatility in terms of making 12 personnel a bigger focus, since they let Chris Manhertz walk in free agency, quietly one of the better blocking tight ends in the league. This was definitely a need, with Luke Farrell as the only established guy on the roster, although it did feel like they kind of just jumped on the run at the position as the 5th name off the board in round 2, and a person at South Dakota State's Tucker Kraft ranked higher, who went 17 picks later. And they made it 3 for 3 on offense for the selections through the first 2 days, which is surprising because that unit showed so much improvement this past season. Tank Bixby comes in the mold of your old school SEC running backs, who brings an impressive combination of size, power and speed, is able to shoot through tight creases, but also incorporate jump stops and jump cuts well for big bag. Plus then he can clear arm tackles as if they're nothing a lot of times, can drop the pads on guys in his way emphatically, and you're not going to see linebackers catch up on him once he gets ahead of steam. With that being said, definitely not the most efficient in-between the tackles runner, who doesn't have that solid footwork to operate well in tight quarters, Not much of a creator in the open field if there's nothing in terms of a lane to shoot through, and he's not the most natural pass catcher. So a lot to give up here. When you already drafted Snoop Conner as a power back all in the 5th round last year, you still have Jermichael Hasty and just signed Dearness Johnson for this season. I had Bixby outside my top 10 backs, and he goes as number 7, when it wasn't much of a need, I would say, already having guys who can provide more of a power element next to Travis Etienne. I'll go a lot quicker here on the 9 names deselected on day 3, because otherwise we'll be here for hours. Ventrell Miller seems like he was with the Gators for like 8 years. Very smart linebacker who routinely is in the right position and prides himself on a physical brand of football, trusting his eyes and flying downhill against the run. He's worked on his ability to redirect and flip his hips around in order to be more impactful in zone coverage, and I thought he was underutilized as a pressure player. With his force to run through backs in protection, there are some athletic limitations when you see him get crossed over by running backs in man coverage, and last season his missed tackle rate was above 15%, just getting too aggressive overcommitting his shoulders in terms of the angles he took to the ball. Since the Jags signed Foye Oluokun and drafted a couple of linebackers in round 1 and 3 last year, he's probably an excellent number 4 on the roster and shows off in special teams early. Tyler Lacey is a player with inside-out versatility at 6'4", 285 pounds, with massive hands to control the point of attack, and either stay square or set a physical edge as a 6 technique, while being a bear as a tackler to create instant stops when the ball carrier tries to get past him, brings plenty of force to condense the pocket with power, is regularly able to create an angle towards the quarterback with the arm over jumping inside of his man, while being able to corner his rushes pretty effectively. Sort of a tweener build who lacks the quick twitch to really threaten the edges of blockers, needs to do a better job of keeping his frame clean and getting to a secondary rush maneuver earlier. Very much in the mold of Roy Robertson Harris, and with how dominant that guy was down the stretch, this is probably a direct move to give him a breather every once in a while, fulfilling that type of role. Yazir Abdullah is a hyper-athletic, yet undersized edge linebacker hybrid, packs some impressive power in his upper body for his size, and breaks good leg drive in order to set the edge in the run game. Yet his ability to crash through the inside shoulder of tackles to create disruption should translate well to more of an off-ball role as well. Crazy short air burst, an ability to corner his rushes, being able to pull off ghost moves, yet if you present an open chest to him, he will dictate terms with stabs as well, and he has plays on tape where he literally runs with and armbars a receiver wheeling up the sideline off motion, turning his head and picking off the pass. Doesn't have the bulk or speed to power you'd like to see from a full-time edge, yet he only has right around 200 career snaps off the ball, and lacks a certain discipline in his run fits, so interested to see how he'll be deployed, since they already have Josh Allen and the first rounder from 3 years ago in K'Lavon Chaisson, with similar versatile profiles, and I could see him actually replacing what Arden Key did for his defense last season, where he's lined up in nose tackle times and slanted all across the formation in more exotic pressure looks. Antonio Johnson at pick 160 was a major steal in my opinion. I saw an avenue where he might fall to day 3 because he was primarily a slot defender in college, yet may not be every team's cup of tea, with more of a lanky build, didn't clear the 4.5 mark in the 40, and had minimal ball production at A&M. But I look at him as somebody who can match up against different body types, thanks to his IQ of understanding who he's facing, how he uses those long arms to sustain contact throughout the development of routes, and rakes through the catch point, while his awareness in zone can really shine, and he's a big plus in run defense as well as in the screen game, but not allowing blockers to get into his frame. His missed tackle rate doubled last season, but that was more to do being part of a really bad year for the Aggies, and him having to line up as a deep safety with tons of space for the ball carrier to work with. I think with how much better Darius Williams and the Jags defense as a whole was when he was playing outside, and a top veteran option in the slots being Trey Herndon, I would not be surprised if Johnson starts there, or at least sees the field a lot versus athletic tight ends, and as a dime backer even. Washington has some of the best hands and ball skills in this entire draft. Very solidly built receiver at 5'10", nearly 210 pounds, who understands how to manipulate defenders with body language and different pacing, while not being afraid of going over the middle. He put on a show in the Ohio State game last season, with so many acrobatic grabs, and then once he's secured the ball, he turns into a running back in terms of creativity in space, and having broken 31 tackles on 110 catches these past 2 years combined. Doesn't give you much in terms of a vertical component. In order to really succeed in the slots, he'll need to work on not overstriding as regularly, to be crisp in his breaks, as well as adapting the feel for stopping himself in windows against zone coverage. While Zay Jones is more of a classic Z, you have some flexibility between Christian Kirk and now Calvin Ridley playing inside or out, along with Washington now being thrown into the mix as a primary slot. Once again, don't have anything on Christian Braswell, Eric Hallett, or Raymond Wursek. Sorry for that, guys, but since they were all outside the top 350 prospects on consensus boards, I don't think I'm the only one. Cooper Hodges played right tackle for App State, but probably moves inside in the pros, with arms fringing right at the 33-inch mark, and I don't believe he has the foot quickness to stay out on the edge. Really snatches the jersey of defenders as he's wide in the front side and stays engaged with them, and snatches up bodies on the second level, whilst being very controlled in his wide base with a strong anchor and pass pro, but plays super top heavy in that regard and has no experience at guard, so he'll face an uphill battle to make that roster. And finally, Derek Parrish presents a rocked up frame and hard-head worker mentality, was highly productive playing on the edge for Houston, launching himself into the chest and finding off blockers in the run game, while having expert timing in his hand swipes, lots of force when he stabs at blockers, and they can yank them to the side in order to win as a pass rusher late. But he's only right around 6 foot tall, with 29¼ inch arms, which creates major disadvantages for him, especially being more of a straight line player. How he could make this team is probably in the mold of Patrick Ricard in Baltimore, since he played a lot of fullback during Easter Shrine Week, and looked pretty natural doing so, somebody who can fill multiple roles and be a special teams ace, while only taking up one spot in the roster. While I do have some concerns about Harris in the first round, especially trading down for extra picks, and still getting the best second tier left tackle is fine with me. Strange was about around early I thought, and Bixby I just don't really get at all, because I thought there were better backs available anyway, and some of them went late on day 3 because of how deep that class was. Day 3 I liked a lot better, with Antonio Johnson being a definite steal for me, but once again a lot of hybrid defenders in particular, Parker Washington being the only other legit surplus value selection I thought. Not sure if you needed to really make 13 picks here, and then the early ones you had to reach more than I would have liked to see. I was a bit underwhelmed by what they did here. They are reigning division champs, and with all 3 other teams using picks 2, 4, and 33 on quarterbacks, they go into a season as significant favorites, so this is your time to strike, while they have a legit difference maker on the center on a rookie deal, and I love what they were able to make of the available resources. Which brings us to the final team of the day, the Tennessee Titans. Thankfully half as big a class as the last 2 teams. They went first round 11th overall, Peter Skoronski, offensive tackle / interior O-line out of Northwestern. Second round 33rd overall, Will Levis, quarterback Kentucky. Third round 81st overall, Tyjae Spears, running back Tulane. 5th round 147th overall, Josh Wiley, tight end Cincinnati. 6th round 186th overall, Jalen Duncan, offensive tackle Maryland. And then 7th round 228th overall, Colton Dowell, wide receiver UT Martin. After all the speculation around moving up as high as number 3 overall potentially, the Titans just stick at pick 11 and select arguably the best, most boring player almost to Peter Skoronski. And with boring, I mean somebody who you put on the tape and it's just rep after rep where he does not lose. His ability to center blocks, latch his hands at the right aiming points, and take care of his assignments in the run game looks more like a 10-year vet. And then he works up to the second level with great control, being able to get under the chest of linebackers with great consistency. He was always first of the ball, gets to his landmarks, and is able to frame rushers with a great understanding for who he's facing and how to counter their approach. Consistently shows good bend in his knees, a flat back, the eyes are up, and he understands the depth of the pocket, while counterbalancing his lack of length with varying his approach and using his arms in independent fashion. Now, the issue with staying out of tackle is that he's below 310 pounds and has just 32¼ inch arms. He'll constantly be outreached by NFL edge defenders, and while I love how much control he plays under, at times I appreciate a little more urgency to just negate that space in the first instance rather than trying to establish position. Since Tennessee traded for a former first rounder in Andre Dillard from Philly and drafted Nicholas Petit-Frere 69th overall last year, I think the plan right now is to slide Skoronski in at one of those guard spots after they just let Nate Davis walk in free agency. If Dillard can't make the jump into the starting lineup, it'll be a question between if they feel more comfortable with Skoronski or another second rounder from 2 years ago in Dylan Raduns on the blind side. But I think what this selection provides most of is the versatility along the front 5. Then the start day 2, after they supposedly tried to move up late into round 1, they climb up 8 spots to 33rd overall in exchange for sliding down 9 spots in the 3rd and tossing another 3 next year, and they were the ones to stop the Will Levis fall. A guy who was suspected might go as high as number 2 overall until the day before the draft actually started, looking at betting markets, but that proved to be more of a smokescreen, and the young man had to wait all night in the green room before Tennessee gave him a call early on the next day. In terms of what to get on the field, I think Levis is actually more raw than the guy who was called a project in Florida's Anthony Richardson, in terms of inconsistent footwork, not finding the right trajectory on deep balls, and some immature decision making where he tests windows he really shouldn't, or flips the ball out whilst getting hit. However, in terms of what the NFL is typically looking for in a big quarterback with a strong arm and incredible toughness, there's still a lot to like here. Easy flick of the wrist to create velocity on the ball, fully capable of driving routes out to the numbers, and 60 plus yards down the field, stands tall inside the pocket, not scared of pressure coming in, but has some really impressive throws on the move as well, even off the wrong foot. And going back to 2021, when he wasn't dealing with turf toe, he was actually a very effective runner when given a lane. I think this is a great situation for him to learn behind Ryan Tannehill, and depending on how the season goes, he may take over in the latter part of the year, since it looks like that coaching staff is out on Malik Willis. After they seemingly were underwhelmed with what he showed, even though I would argue they give him minimal time to prepare, and he had just some guys out there with him as a receiver. But yeah, it seems like they're kind of moving on to Levis as a primary plan beyond Tannehill then. Tyjae Spears in the third round is interesting because he's so different to what they have in Derrick Henry, of course, who could still be a trade candidate. Instant acceleration to slice through holes or beat defenses around the corner for big plays routinely, presenting tremendous curvilinear movement, packs this gliding jump cut almost, and a wicked dead-leg move, but can also stick his foot in the ground to cut across the grain or get into a foot race out to the sideline, which he will win mostly. Spears breaks way more tackles than you'd think, around the 200-pound mark, as guys slip off him, and he keeps himself alive constantly, leading to an insane average of 4.55 yards after contact last season. And then he has the long speed to finish explosive runs in the end zone. And he showed during Senior Bowl week that he can route up linebackers one-on-one, as more than just a guy who can catch a swing route and make somebody miss or take it up the sideline. Does rely heavily on his speed to bounce runs that are designed to hit inside, tends to overrun pullers at times, and while he doesn't mind throwing his body in the way of blitzers, he lacks the strength to actually anchor against them, and he suffered 2 torn ACLs in college already, which supposedly he doesn't have any now in one of his knees, so not sure if long-term durability could become an issue then, because otherwise I think he can be a difference maker in the NFL if they decide to eventually move on from King Henry. But even now, he can provide a very different element as a dynamic space player who is certainly capable of running between the tackles. After skipping the 4th round, Tennessee added to the tight end room with Josh Wiley, 6'6", 245 pounds, more of a high-cut build, but impressive burst to threaten defenses on seams and benders, can change up gears on the fly, reduce his size and make precise breaks, or bend off either foot to beat safeties across the face, along with plus awareness for finding those soft spots in zone coverage, extremely reliable hands with consistent overhand technique away from his frame, and then wastes no time getting vertical. As a run blocker, he operates from a wide base, is able to land his hands inside the chest of defenders, and roll his hips for contact, regularly being utilized on the move. Because of his build, he struggles to find leverage in the run game and gets too far over his skis a lot as a blocker, while not giving you a whole lot in terms of making people miss after the catch. Chig Okonkwo had a very promising rookie campaign, who I thought made a lot of sense in the former Jonnu Smith role, where he does his best work after the catch. I still don't look at Wiley as a primary inline option, but they do present some different skill sets now that'll be interesting to see how they can be deployed at the same time on the field. Jalen Duncan is somebody who I thought could have easily gone like 100 picks earlier than this. 6'6", 320 pounds, able to uncall his hips to create lateral movements, but also agile enough to execute scoop blocks on the backside of wide zone, while his mobility was regularly utilized on pin and pull concepts out to the edge or wrapping around from the backside on GT power, really jumps out of his stance and has the foot agility to deal with speedy rushers in his pass sets, but also tremendous change of direction to mirror counter moves laterally, and I was really impressed not only with his movement skills, but also the ability to stonewall power rushers during Senior Bowl week. There's too much chest-to-chest blocking going on in the run game with Duncan, while getting his weight shifted too far over his toes in that regard, and he relied heavily on 200 punches in pass pro, which led to him losing his balance way more than he'd like to see this past season. So there are plenty of things that need fixing up, but I think the natural athletic tools are something you can't teach, sort of in the mold of the things that worried you about Nicholas Petit-Frere a year ago. I think this is a project I want to invest into, especially at this late, and see if I can at least turn him into a quality swing option. I unfortunately didn't get to Colton Dowell, and I don't think I have any access to UT Martin tape anyway. However, as far as the rest of this class goes, I think Tennessee found a nice balance between addressing areas of need right now, but also potentially elevating what they can be in the future if they hit on getting a potential franchise quarterback and a highly talented developmental tackle all the way in the 6th round. Skoronski to me is a 10-year plug-and-play starter on the O-line who could give them flexibility in the mold of Zach Martin with the Cowboys, another tackle convert from college who's kicked out to the edge in a pinch. Spears is a very fun back who runs bigger than the size would indicate, but for now gives you a different dimension from the position. They continue to add different elements to the pass-catching options, and of course what they can get out of Levis in the future will play the biggest role in how successful this draft will ultimately be. But trading away AJ Brown in the draft last year, a move which head coach Mike Vrabel did not seem happy about in that moment, and they ultimately moved on a general manager to Ryan Carfon, they acknowledged that they're at least retooling, and if they shed a couple of more contracts, in particular Ryan Tannehill on the last year of his deal, they could make the transition a fairly smooth one. Now let's get into the draft class rankings portion of this video. I put the Colts at number 1, and they're up there as one of the top 3 draft classes league-wide for me. Obviously really stress the focus on finding high-level athletes with all 12 of the selections, but they get a lot of guys who should make an impact, at least as rotational players fairly early, and present high football character from what I've taken away from them. I believe Anthony Richardson has a chance to turn himself into the best player from this entire draft and become one of the true titans at the quarterback position that give the team a chance every year. While most of that roster that we all loved, and why many picked them to win the South last season, is still there, along with an infusion of young talent. Titans come in second for me. I just talked about them. What does it for me is that balance between filling key spots now, including maybe the safest player of this entire draft in Peter Skoronski, yet you also move up at the top of day 2 to get a guy with the physical tools to turn himself into a franchise quarterback and puts you on that rookie clock at that position whilst you're working through a soft reset of what still is a pretty top-heavy roster. Texans at number 3, definitely the most risk associated with this group, not because they took too many boom or bust type of players, but you give up your 1st and 3rd round the next year already, moving up from non-quarterback, cornerstone type of defensive player, and then moving up a few spots again at the end of the 2nd round to draft what was considered a day 3 center prospect, plus a 5'8", 165-pound receiver early in the 3rd. I like many of the guys that they've brought in, and I'm excited about DeMeco Ryans era in Houston, but he's definitely put a stamp on this organization already, and they're locked in now. And finally, the Jags unfortunately find themselves at the bottom of the list again, just like last year, when I thought they picked Trevon Walker, who was somewhat proven talent, and so far I'd say he's brought in mixed results. Kinda had to jump on the tight end run early in order to not miss out. They take a running back inside the top 100 when it wasn't much of a need I thought, and there were better options available multiple rounds later. Only 1 or 2 legit surplus value selections among the 13 total by my book, and even the one I think about here primarily was a hybrid slot defender with some asterisk medically attached to him I've heard about somewhere. I thought their chances to make more of an impact here with the capital that they had, since this division seems like it's theirs for the taking yet again this year. But that wraps up another one of these videos. We're now 3/4 of the way through, and you can check out all the other divisions from the North, East and South right here on my channel. Thank you so much for watching this one. You can probably tell I invested a ton of time in evaluating 340 draft prospects and trying to put the ones selected by each team into context. So if you enjoy these breakdowns, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a like, subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet, maybe share with a friend or two to get them through the depths of the off season, and feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments. Another video should pop up at the top right corner right now, as we've made it through 6 of these already, in case you wanted to just keep on watching. We'll be back next week, finishing up with the 2 Western divisions, which have a chance to include 2 of the top 4 teams, I'd say in either conference. That's going to be very interesting, hoping you'll be back for those. So, until then, see you later. Peace!